Spring, 1869, Nevada Basin. The wind didn't howl that morning, it crept. It slithered low across the Nevada Basin like a whisper full of old secrets and unfinished business. Dust danced where sunlight struck the bone-dry earth, and the sun itself bled red along the horizon, casting long shadows over the edge of a tired town called Granger's Hollow. They said nothing good ever stayed in Granger's. Dreams got swallowed by debt, silver turned to sand, and men grew mean under the weight of their own failures. It wasn't a place for kindness, or softness, or hope. That's where Eli Brandt learned to breathe. At 16 he didn't have much. Not a name folks respected. Not a place to lay his head. But he had a sharp eye, a quiet mouth, and a heart that refused to die. Most called him saloon rat. The kind of boy that wiped tables, ran whiskey for half a cent, and slept in the grain room behind the painted vulture. He was small, wiry, always watching. Too quiet for a boy. Too quick to duck. No one remembered how he came to Granger's Hollow, only that he'd been there since before he could spell it. His parents were ghosts, whispers traded between barkeeps and miners. Killed in a wagon fire, some said. Others claimed bandits. Whatever the truth, it never mattered. Survival didn't require history. It required instinct. Eli learned young that fists taught faster than books, and trust was a luxury no one could afford. Still, he had something more dangerous than fists or a gun. He had memory. And he watched, listened, stored away things others missed. He saw who the sheriff shook hands with too long, which men always bet high and never lost. How the owner of the painted vulture, a thick-skulled drunk named Reeve, met with strangers in the back room every Thursday after sunset. Eli scrubbed bloodstains off floors by day and studied card decks by night, his fingers tracing the bends, memorizing weight, learning how a drunk miner's eye twitched right before he lied. Then came the night that changed him. The saloon was half empty, heat still rising off the floors even after the sun had sunk. Reeve was in the back, door cracked just wide enough for Eli to slip past while pretending to mop. Inside sat a man Eli had never seen, black coat, white gloves, not dusty like the rest. They spoke low, but Eli heard enough. Ain't dried up. That mine still got breath. Just needs the right hands. Reeve scoffed. That shaft's cursed. The man leaned in. Silver doesn't care about curses. Cares about risk. And if someone's got the stones to reach in and take it. Eli froze. They were talking about the Weaver claim, a forgotten stretch of land just outside town, rumored hollow and worthless. But Eli knew better. He'd spent time there, hiding from drunks, watching the way the dirt sparkled when it rained. He remembered a prospector once said, "The real silver's too deep for a poor man's shovel." Eli wasn't poor in smarts. He didn't have a shovel, but he had ears. And the look on the man's face told him what he needed, that the land wasn't worthless. Just unclaimed. And Reeve wasn't biting. That's when the idea took root. Dangerous. Stupid. But real. The next morning, Eli walked out of town, boots half falling apart, heart pounding like a war drum. He carried with him everything he owned, a torn satchel, $2.16, a pen, and a forged land deed with a name that wasn't his. Elijah Brandt, it read. Close enough to fool a clerk, far enough to stay safe. He reached the county office by dusk, standing in line between grown men, most of them drunk or sunburned or both. When it came his turn, the clerk barely looked up. Took his paper, stamped it, slid it back. Just like that, Eli owned a dead man's mine. Back in Granger's, no one noticed him differently. Still a boy. Still dirty. Still scrubbing whiskey off floorboards. But at night, he sat outside the Weaver claim, legs crossed on stone, staring down into the shaft like it was a promise. He didn't dig yet. That would have drawn attention. He waited. Planned. He bet at cards in the painted vulture with better aim, taking small pots to avoid suspicion. He loaned out nickels to drunk miners who'd forget to pay back. He watched the prices of tools, timber, nails. He watched men. And slowly money came in. Quite unnoticed. The town didn't know it yet, but Eli Brandt was rising. Not because he wanted power, but because he had nothing else. And he wasn't going to die as a ghost in a back room with a mop and no name. The red horizon watched him every dawn as he returned to the mine alone. Waiting, like it too had made him a promise. And somewhere inside him, buried under silence and hurt and long nights cleaning vomit from bar floors, something whispered, "You're more than this. But you'll have to take it. No one will give it." He never smiled. Never hoped. But he never gave in either. Granger's Hollow wouldn't know it for a while. But a storm had begun to gather. And its name was Eli Brandt. Autumn, 1879, 10 years later. The desert hadn't changed, but Eli had. The wind still slid through the canyons like a knife through silk, whispering the same secrets it always had. But Eli no longer crouched behind saloons. He rode into Granger's Hollow upright, slow, and deliberate, dust trailing behind his black mare like smoke from a dying fire. He wore no badge, no tin star, no gang's colors. But he didn't need to. Every eye in town followed him like they were trying to solve a riddle that kept changing shapes. His jaw had hardened, eyes darker than the shadows of high noon, and his silence now felt heavier than gunmetal. He wasn't the mop boy anymore. He wasn't even Elijah Brandt, that ghost paper name he once used to steal a dream. He was Eli Brandt, and the town he once served now whispered his name with either respect or fear, often both. He rode straight to the Weaver claim. Not because he needed to, he owned more land now, stakes from here to Colorado, but because it was ritual. A silent nod to the place that had given him his start. The silver was long gone, stripped clean 5 years prior, but Eli still walked the ground like it owed him something. Or maybe like he still owed it. He dismounted, kneeled, and scooped a handful of soil, dry and red as blood. Let it fall through his fingers like time. Behind him, the wind carried another whisper. This time, a real one. "Never thought I'd see you crawl back to that dirt, Eli." He didn't flinch. He knew that voice. He stood slowly, dusted his hands, and turned to face her. Claire May. She hadn't changed much, though the lines around her eyes told stories now. Her hair was still the color of prairie wheat, swept back in a braid tight enough to cut. But it wasn't the hair or the dress or even the revolver on her hip that caught Eli off guard. It was her eyes. Still sharp. Still stubborn. But tired. Not in the way that said she needed rest, but in the way that said she'd stopped waiting. "Clara," he said, voice dry from years of silence. She nodded once. "Didn't expect that to be the first word out of your mouth." "What should I have said?" She shrugged. "Something real." Silence stretched long and taut between them, filled with all the words neither had said in 10 years. He had left her. That much was simple. No letter. No reason. Just gone. And she had waited. For a time. "Didn't think you'd be here still," he said finally. "I ain't still here, Eli. I just never ran." The words hit harder than a bullet. He looked past her, to the town. It hadn't changed much. New paint on the saloon. A taller church steeple. But the same bones. The same sky. "You came back for something," Clara said, folding her arms. "Not just to breathe old dust." Eli hesitated. "I heard Reeve was back." Clara's jaw tightened. "You heard right. Crawled out of some mine in Mexico with a new bankroll and 2 Pinkertons riding behind him. And now he's buying everything he once couldn't steal." Eli nodded slowly. "That's why I'm here." "Vengeance?" she asked, bitter. 10 years gone and you come back for revenge?" Eli looked down. "No." "Then what?" He glanced up at her, and for the first time in years, his voice broke just slightly. "To keep a promise." That stopped her cold. The fire in her dimmed for a heartbeat. She looked away. Promises don't mean much when they come a decade late. He nodded. "I know." They stood there, 2 ghosts in the same place they once dreamed. He had loved her once, deeply. Enough to make plans. To speak of land and quiet lives and a home carved into the canyon ridge. But the silver had spoken louder. And so had the war that followed it, the war of men with guns and greed and no mercy. Eli had joined a band of vigilantes in the Arizona territory, chasing outlaws and selling justice to the highest bidder. He'd made his fortune in silence. He buried friends. And with every mile further from Granger's, Clara's face became something like a photograph kept too long in the sun. But it had never faded entirely. And now, here she stood, real, hardened, and not waiting. That last part stung most. "Reeve wants the Weaver land," Clara said, her voice low. "He knows it's dry, but he's betting it holds water under the shale. Water means ranching. Town control." "He's still bluffing?" Eli asked. Clara shook her head. "No. He ain't bluffing this time. He's got maps. Engineers. Real men with ink and numbers." Eli nodded. "Then I'll stop him." "You think the town will rally behind you?" "No," he said, mounting his horse. "I think they'll stay scared." "Then you're riding alone again?" Eli paused. Looked at her. "I never meant to ride without you," he said. And with that, he turned his mare and headed back toward town, the wind biting at his coat. Clara didn't call after him. She didn't move. But her hands stayed near her revolver. Not because she planned to use it, but because she might still have to. And somewhere deep down, in a heart worn thin by time and betrayal, a memory stirred. 10 years ago, a boy had made her a promise. Now, a man had come back to keep it. Nightfall in Granger's Hollow. The saloon still smelled of old sweat, spilled whiskey, and regret. The piano hadn't played in months, and the cards on the tables looked like they'd been dealt by ghosts. Eli stepped through the swinging doors just past sundown, and for a moment, every glass paused midair, every mouth held its breath. A half-dozen heads turned his way. Most looked down just as fast. But one didn't. A man with gray in his mustache and a crooked star pinned to his vest stood behind the bar, polishing a glass that was already clean. "Never figured you'd ride back into this place," the man said without looking up. "Didn't figure I'd be welcome, Sheriff," Eli replied, taking off his hat. Sheriff Amos Clay finally looked him in the eye. The years had settled heavy in his shoulders, but his stare was still sharp enough to pin a rattlesnake. "Welcome's a funny thing. Not sure this town knows how to give one anymore." "I ain't asking for one." "Good," Amos said, setting the glass down. "'Cause Reeve already bought himself a piece of it." Eli stepped up to the bar. "How much?" "Enough. He owns the bank, the mill, and 5 men who carry iron like it's gospel." Amos poured a shot of rye and slid it over. "And they don't scare easy." Eli downed the shot. "They will." The room stayed quiet for a beat too long. A card flopped on a nearby table. Dice clinked in a cup. Then the doors creaked again. A man walked in, flanked by 2 more. All 3 wore clean coats and the kind of smug that needed correcting. The lead one was tall, with sun-darkened skin, a trimmed beard, and hands that hadn't seen a day of labor in years. He smiled like a man who'd bought the land beneath your boots. "Silas Reeve." "Well," he said, voice oily smooth, "if it ain't the prodigal pest." Eli didn't turn. He didn't have to. Reeve stepped closer, boots clicking too clean on the worn-wood floor. "I heard the desert spit you back out, Eli. Figured you'd come crawling home eventually. We all do." Eli slowly turned. "Some of us come back to clean house." Reeve grinned wider. "Oh, you'll get cleaned all right. Right out of town." Sheriff Clay stepped forward, but Reeve's hand rose casually. "Easy, Amos. I'm just saying hello. Ain't no law against that, is there?" "You test the law too hard, it bites," the sheriff said. Reeve chuckled. "Then I hope it still has teeth." He leaned close to Eli, lowering his voice just enough for only them to hear. "Tell me, does she still wear that little gold locket? Or did she bury it with the rest of your promises?" Eli's jaw clenched, but he didn't move. "Thought so," Reeve said, turning away. "See, the thing about running away is, no matter how far you go, your shadow always beats you back." He walked out with his men, laughing, the sound scraping down Eli's spine like rusted nails. The saloon slowly breathed again. Sheriff Clay shook his head. "He's worse than his old man. Meaner, richer, and twice as clever." Eli nodded. "And he's planning something. Already bought out the town council. Pushing for a railroad spur through the Weaver claim. There's no gold left there." "No," Amos said, "but there's aquifer under it. Big one. Enough to turn this town into a ranching hub." He's betting that whoever controls the water controls the future. Eli stared at the amber in his empty glass. That land was promised to the town. To Clara. That promise is dust, son. Law says he's got purchase rights if she can't prove title. And Reeves got lawyers thicker than molasses. Eli pushed away from the bar. Then I'll do what I do best. And what's that? He stared at the door Reeve had just walked through. Make men like him nervous. Outside, the night had grown cold. Moonlight stretched thin over the rooftops, and the stars blinked like watchers. Eli rode to the edge of town, past the old chapel and schoolhouse, where a single oil lamp still burned in the window of a small cottage. He dismounted quietly and stood for a moment at the gate. His fingers touched the top rail, just as he'd done 10 years ago, the night he first kissed her. The door opened before he could knock. Clara stood in the frame, holding a kerosene lamp. I heard, she said. Reeve came to the saloon. Eli nodded. He's trying to take everything. Starting with the land. Clara stepped aside. Come in. We've got work to do. Inside, maps were already unrolled across the table. Old mining claims. Survey sketches. Water routes. You've been preparing, Eli said. I knew he'd try. Sooner or later. And you didn't run? Clara looked up, meeting his eyes. You already asked me that. He nodded. I guess I needed to hear it again. She handed him a rolled document. This is what's left of the original land deed. My father filed it when he struck silver. But it's incomplete. He died before registering the full plot? He was murdered, she said, voice flat. 2 bullets in the back. No witnesses. Eli's jaw tightened. Reeve. No proof. No justice. Just the smell of money. Eli turned the brittle paper in his hand. Then we find proof. And if we can't? He looked up at her, his voice low. Then we remind him what justice tastes like. Clara stared at him, a flicker of something buried deep in her eyes. Not hope, not yet, but something that might become it. They stood there in the lamplight, 2 people haunted by the same ghost. A promise made long ago on red soil, under a horizon that hadn't yet bled dry. The past hadn't forgiven them. But maybe, just maybe, it hadn't forgotten them either. Smoke over the red horizon. The sun rose red behind Granger's Hollow, casting long shadows across the land. Clara stood at the fence line of her family's old claim, boots sunk in dry dirt, fingers clenching the deed Eli had brought back from town. She watched the wind bend the weeds like whispers, and with every gust, she could feel the noose tightening around her land. From behind, Eli approached on horseback, the morning dust soft beneath his mare's hoofs. They moved the fence line, Clara said before he could speak. He scanned the field. The wooden stakes marking the boundary had shifted at least 50 feet inward. Reeves pushing the line again, she continued. Happened overnight. No warning. No law. Eli dismounted, walking up beside her. He wants to provoke you. If you fight back wrong, he takes it all. I'm not a fool. I know. She folded the deed and tucked it into her coat pocket. You remember the red oak that used to stand out here? She asked, voice distant. He nodded. Lightning split it the night your father died. It used to mark the true boundary. Town folks remember. But they're afraid. They're tired, Eli. Afraid is what comes after too much loss. He didn't argue. Instead, he turned toward the old barn behind the cabin. I need a place to work. You still carve? She asked. No, he said. I build traps now. Inside the barn, Eli cleared cobwebs and unearthed a dusty chest from beneath a pile of broken planks. Inside lay tools wrapped in oiled cloth, and beneath them, an iron badge dulled with age. Clara stood in the doorway, watching him. That was your father's. Eli nodded. He wore it until the night he didn't come home. Sheriff said he got caught in crossfire. I saw the bullet hole, Clara. It was in his back. She stepped inside, crossing the dusty floor. You ever forgive this place? I tried, he said. Didn't take. She handed him a tin of coffee. Then maybe you try again. This time, don't do it alone. He looked up. For the first time in years, Her voice held something warmer than fire. Something close to faith. That night, Reeves' men returned. 3 horses trotted in from the north, their riders cloaked in black. They didn't knock. They didn't shout. They lit a torch and hurled it into the old barn. From across the field, flames leapt into the dark sky, a pillar of orange against the horizon. Clara screamed, running toward it, but Eli was already there, grabbing a shovel and tossing dirt onto the fire. The barn groaned and caved inward, smoke swallowing the sky. By the time they got it under control, the damage was done. Ash clung to Clara's cheeks. He's sending a message. Eli stared into the smoking ruin. Then let's write one of our own. At sunrise, the town awoke to a strange sight. A single rider had nailed a charred piece of timber to the front of Reeves' mill. Burned into it, carved with a hot brand, were 4 words. You started this war. Inside the mill, Silas Reeves studied the message with mild amusement. He's still got some fire, he said to his foreman. Let's see how long it burns. By midday, word spread fast. Eli McCall had returned. Clara Weaver was standing tall. And Reeve, despite all his money, his muscle, and his men, had been openly challenged. At the town's edge, Eli met with Sheriff Amos Clay beneath the rusted clock tower. I need your help, Eli said. I don't wear the badge like I used to. You still know the law. Reeves bought most of it. Then give me what's left. Amos studied him a long moment. What's your play? Find the missing claim. The original title. It's got Clara's father's seal and Reeves' father's signature. You think he forged the transfer? I think he killed the man before the ink dried. The sheriff sighed. If it exists, it's buried deep. Somewhere no one wanted it found. Eli's eyes narrowed. Then we dig where it hurts. That night, Clara led Eli to her father's old chest beneath the floorboards. This was hidden the night he died, she whispered. He told me, if something happens, don't trust the bank. Trust the land. They pried open the chest. Inside were faded maps, a silver locket, and a folded piece of parchment sealed in wax. Eli opened it slowly. The original deed. Dated, stamped, and signed, not just by Clara's father, but witnessed by a Reverend Samuel Boyd, a man who'd vanished the same month as the murder. Clara's hands trembled. This is it. Eli looked up at her. Now we take it to the judge. She hesitated. You think he'll hear it? He won't have a choice, Eli said, because tomorrow we bring the whole town. That evening, a quiet hush settled over Granger's Hollow. But not in Clara's home. They worked by lantern light, copying the document, gathering maps, building the case. And as the oil burned low, Clara glanced across the table. You said once you'd never come back, she said softly. I meant it. But you're here. He met her gaze, steady. I promised you once, under that red oak, I'd protect this land. I broke that promise. Her eyes welled, but she didn't look away. You didn't break it, she whispered. You just lost your way. He reached across, took her hand. Then maybe tomorrow I start keeping it again. Outside, the horizon darkened, but it wasn't fear that filled the sky. It was fire, resolve, and the wind whispering, at last, that something long buried was beginning to rise. A promise. Voices from the dust. Morning came heavy with heat, the kind that pressed on your skin and made everything feel slower, except the rising tension in Granger's Hollow. Word had spread overnight like brushfire. Clara Weaver held the original deed to her family's land. And Eli McCall, the man some called outlaw and others called hero, was walking beside her again. They left at dawn for the courthouse. Clara wore her mother's Sunday dress, boots still caked in ash from the barn fire. Eli wore black, not mourning, not defiance, just simple and clean, like he'd stripped away the years and come back the man he was meant to be. As they stepped into the square, the silence was telling. Shopkeepers stopped sweeping. Mothers held their children closer. Even the stray dogs watched, ears perked. Sheriff Amos Clay stood outside the courthouse, arms crossed. You sure about this? He asked Eli. Sure enough, Eli said. Judge still inside? He'll hear it. But you know Silas won't take this quiet. Eli smiled grimly. He's not built for quiet. Clara reached into her satchel and handed Amos the sealed document. Original deed. Signed by Reverend Boyd. If we're right, the transfer Reeve used to seize the land won't hold. Amos nodded. Let's test the law. Inside the dim hall, Judge Colton, a stern, aging man with a thick mustache and thin patience, scanned the paper. His eyes narrowed at the signature. I remember Boyd, he said. Vanished after Clara's father died. We think he was silenced, Eli said. The judge looked up. That's an accusation of murder. It's a statement of fact, Clara replied, her voice steady. And this is proof of theft. Judge Colton sat back in his chair. I'll review the land records. If this document holds, Reeve's claim crumbles. But I'll need a statement. Witnesses. And you'll need to testify publicly. Eli nodded. We're not hiding anymore. That evening, the town gathered in the saloon, whispers buzzing like flies around a corpse. Reeve entered with his usual entourage, 3 men at his back, all broad shoulders and empty eyes. He walked to the center and stood like he owned the place because for the longest time he had. You think some paper changes anything? He said loudly, eyes locked on Eli. You think this town cares about ink and signatures? Clara stepped forward. This town cared about my father. It buried him while you built your mill. It mourned while you bought their silence. Reeve smirked. You think they'll rise up for a memory? I think, Eli cut in, they're done kneeling. The room stilled. An old farmer, Mr. Thatch, rose from his corner stool. I remember the night Clara's daddy died. We all do. Just didn't have the spine to say it. A woman, Miriam Lane, once Reeve's bookkeeper, stood next. I saw the real records once. And I saw what Reeve made me destroy. Then came old Sam Carter, hands shaking but voice clear. Boyd came to me before he vanished. Said he feared Reeve. Said he'd sign the deed. I told him to go to the judge. He never made it. One by one, the town began to speak. Dusty voices. Tired hearts. But truth, finally spoken, rang louder than fear. Reeve's smirk cracked. You're all fools, he barked. I built this town. Fed you. Gave you jobs when no one else would. Eli stepped forward, close now. You fed them with fear. And they're spitting it out. Reeve's hand dropped to his coat, too fast. A flash of metal. But Eli was faster. Gun drawn, hammer cocked, aimed true. The room held its breath. Don't, Eli warned, voice low. Reeve froze, the glint of steel fading in his hand. I'll see you hang, Reeve spat. No, Clara said, stepping beside Eli. You'll see justice. Amos entered just then, badge pinned tight, rifle in hand. Behind him, 2 deputies. One carried irons. The judge issued the order, Amos said. Forgery, conspiracy, arson, and obstruction of justice. Reeve tried to laugh, but it broke in his throat. The cuffs clicked shut. And just like that, the grip he'd held for 20 years crumbled like sand under boot. Outside, the air felt different, lighter. Clara walked beside Eli, silent for a while. Then, do you remember what you told me before you left? He nodded. That I'd come back. She turned to him. And? I'm back. But not for long, are you? He looked away. There's still things chasing me, Clara. Ghosts. Regrets. We all have those, she said. But I'm tired of running from them, he added. Maybe it's time I face them. Here. She stopped walking. Then stay. The wind stirred between them. Familiar. Stay, she said again, softer. Not just for me. For what we could still build. He looked at the town. At the faces now lit with hope instead of fear. At the home he thought he'd lost. And for the first time in decades, he smiled without ache. I think I will. In the distance, the red horizon burned low, casting long shadows across the valley. But this time, the fire wasn't a warning. It was a new beginning. And tomorrow would rise, not with blood or revenge, but with a promise fulfilled. The last ride at dusk. The sky was beginning to bruise with the colors of coming dusk, red, gold, and that quiet stretch of indigo that slips in when the world exhales. Granger's Hollow sat hushed beneath it, the wind softer, the soil still. A town that had held its breath for 20 years had finally let it go. Eli McCall stood by the fence he helped rebuild that morning, hands rough and stained with cedar pitch. Clara had insisted he take no special treatment, and he hadn't asked for it. Working the land, sweating beneath the open sky, it felt like penance and peace all in one. He hadn't earned back every ounce of the town's trust. But maybe he'd earned the right to stay. Behind him, Clara walked up the path with a tin of coffee in one hand and a shawl draped over the other. Her eyes caught his, and they didn't look away. The silence between them was no longer painful. It was easy now, like the pause between heartbeats. "You still think about leaving?" she asked. Eli took the cup and sipped. "Every day. And every day, the thought lasts shorter." Clara smiled, faint and beautiful. "That's good. Because there's one thing left to do." She nodded toward the ridge just beyond the hollow. That old place where the trail split, west to the outlaw territories, and east toward Fort Nolan, where his debts were still whispered about in saloons and sheriff stations. Eli followed her gaze. "You want me to ride it?" "I want you to choose it," she said. "And not because you're running from something, but because you're riding toward something." He saddled his horse at dusk. Clara handed him a letter, sealed in wax, her handwriting neat. "It's for the Fort Nolan office," she said. "I vouched for you. Told them what you did here. What you tried to make right." Eli looked down at the envelope, then at her. "And if they still want me?" "Then you face it," she said. "But not alone this time." He nodded, jaw clenched. "And if they hang me?" "You'll ride with your head high. Like a man who kept his promise." Eli mounted, the leather creaking under him. The wind had picked up, pulling at the long grass like it remembered his name. Clara stepped forward and reached for his hand. For a moment, she just held it, rough against soft. "You're not the boy I buried," she said. "You're the man I waited for. Whether you come back or not, I need you to know that." He held her gaze. "I'll come back. Not as a ghost this time." He turned the horse, riding slow up the ridge, every hoofbeat echoing the past he once ran from. Atop the rise, Eli paused. Below him stretched the red horizon, that same sun-drenched scar where his story first cracked open. Where he'd once kissed Clara beneath a cottonwood tree and whispered dreams he had no right to speak out loud. The fort lay beyond the ridge to the east. But something tugged in the other direction, westward, where the horizon bled into the unknown. Eli pulled the letter from his coat. Then he did something Clara hadn't expected. He dismounted. He walked to the tallest rock on the ridge and wedged the letter beneath it. A marker, a message, a chapter closed. Then he turned back toward town. Toward the fields. Toward her. Clara sat on the porch that night, staring into the darkness, unsure if she'd ever see his shadow again on the horizon. Then she heard it. Flutes. Slow. Steady. She rose, heart in her throat. And there he was. No longer a myth, no longer a mistake. Just Eli. And this time, he wasn't riding into legend. He was coming home. In the weeks that followed, the hollow healed. The land reclaimed what had been stolen. Reeves' estate was auctioned and turned into a communal mill. Children played where silence once reigned. And Clara's farm grew taller each season, fed by rain, sweat, and hope. Eli never spoke much about the war anymore. But he taught the children how to ride, how to build, and how to stand for something. He planted trees where fences once divided neighbors. And at night, when the sun dipped low, he'd sit beside Clara under the stars and whisper all the things he never got to say back then. "I loved you before I left," he said one night. "I know," she replied, resting her head against his shoulder. "But I needed you to love me enough to come back." He kissed her forehead. "I always did." And so the story of Granger's Hollow didn't end with gunfire or vengeance, but with a promise kept beneath the red horizon. A promise not to a town, not to the law, but to the kind of love that waits and never forgets.